And welcome to the Vermont Legislature's House Committee on Environment and Energy. This morning we have with us TJ Poor, Director of Planning at the Department of Public Service, to give us an overview of electricity. Thank you for joining us, Mr. Poor.
Thanks for having me back. For the record, TJ Poor, Director of Planning at the Department of Public Service. And so today, asked to come in to kind of do two parts on Vermont's electricity picture here. We'll start with kind of the basics of electricity and the structure in Vermont, and then get to our renewable energy policies this afternoon. I just wanted to start by just recognizing my team at the Department of Public Service, the Regulated Utility Planning team. Really talented group of individuals that work really hard on these issues all the time. And when I don't know the answer to something today, I'll be pointing to them and getting you the answer afterwards. Ann Margolis, the Deputy Director of the Division, will be here this afternoon to help out with the renewable energy policy. I should say Chelsea Villiard from our office is on the line and going to share the slides on the screen. So you'll have it both in front of you and on the screen for people that follow along. And then Chelsea, if you could share your screen and go to slide 3, please, that'd be great.
Catherine, will you please make me co-host?
Oh yeah, you already are. It's showing that way here. I hope you are.
I apologize. For some reason, it's not showing me a screen share option.
I think it moved. Is that what we've sort of figured out, Kate? Seems like people are having a hard time finding it.
I think it's on the bottom of the screen and it's like a green button. I'm not sure.
Oh, yep, right there.
Yeah, I think Zoom keeps reformatting. It's not helping us.
Great, thanks. If you could just go to slide 3, it'd be perfect. So yeah. Early on today, we'll cover just the general components of the grid, our regulated utilities, and ISO New England. I won't spend too long since ISO New England's coming in later today. And then go over Vermont's historical and our forecasted energy consumption, and take a quick look at what is supplying that now, what our electricity supply is, and then talk a little bit about components of electric rates and the cost of electricity in Vermont. So
We need.
What's that?
This is what we need.
Yeah. Oh, great. So that's going to be a lot. I'm not sure if we'll get through all of it. We can kind of carry over in the afternoon if we don't get through all of that. And then this afternoon, renewable energy standard, net metering standard offer, get into the policy. So if you go to the next slide. So just before diving in really to where our electricity comes from and our consumption, and just want to quickly go over the power system as a whole. And there's really 4 core components that make up the system. So from generation, those facilities that produce energy, hydroelectric, solar, wind, traditional fossil power plants on the right-hand side of the screen, to transmission lines and distribution lines. Transmission lines, think of as like the highways that move large amounts of electricity quickly, and distribution lines are like the city streets where you get to where you need to go. And then electricity consumers, so homes, businesses that are actually consuming the energy. So this, as you are aware, this kind of traditional paradigm is starting to change a little bit over the last decade, where homes, businesses, and communities are starting to provide their own power and have be part of the generation mix also. And I'll talk a little bit more about energy efficiency as part of that as well. So providing those resources you don't use are a resource just like the resources you actually use on the system. And so and how we plan our system to supply everybody all the time. I'll go in a little more detail on the distribution component first on slide 5. You had some of our utilities in, I think, last week to talk about their systems and maybe the storm outages, but we have 17 electric utilities in Vermont. One of those is an investor-owned utility, so private shareholders make capital investments. They can earn a return on those investments. That's Green Mountain Power. They serve about 3/4 of the state's consumption. And you can see on the map on the left-hand side there, that is most of the state, kind of that bright green territory.
So excuse me, we seem to be in like your view, not slideshow view. So it might be the screen, the slides would be bigger if we were just in slideshow. It's in the upper left, it should be.
Is there a presenter view you could do, Chelsea?
Did that help or no?
That's a little better, but so now we can just see your desktop.
Huh. Okay.
Oh,
Sorry.
Oh. Yeah.
So
that's a lot.
So now we don't see anything, but as you're pulling that back up, maybe I'll keep going a little bit so you have it in front of you. And
folks watching at home, it's also on our webpage under TJ's name today.
Right, thank you. So Green Mountain Power is the majority of the state, but we also have 2 cooperative utilities, Washington Electric Co-op and Vermont Electric Co-op. Serve a lot of rural territory in the northern part of the state, and 14 municipal utilities. 11 of those are participate in energy markets and have their generation and consumption managed in those markets by Vermont Public Power Supply Authority.
Looks like it's reconnecting. Right.
It seems like, isn't it?
We do.
the internet connection.
It's white now. It just came back on, but it was off. And Chelsea, we still don't have a slideshow if you're still with us. And Catherine, I do need you to check the sound because another committee sound was off and no one knew. So that somehow if you can confirm that we have sound, that would be good.
Is it okay to ask a question?
Yes.
Of this grid right here, the distribution utilities, what percentage of that is of power is created by hydro?
Get to that.
Yeah, we are going to
Are you going to get to that at some point?
Yeah, we were going to get to the what utilities generate or buy. Yeah.
We're in a college lecture right now. We'll see where TJ takes us and then we'll take questions.
And we're just laying the framework right now. That's perfect, Chelsea. Thank you. That's big and everybody can see. The last thing to mention on this slide is, we're talking about electricity today, but we have one natural gas utility, Vermont Gas Systems. They are a natural gas utility, but as you'll see in a little bit, they are starting to be involved in electricity.
He's going with our internet or something.
Go ahead. Okay.
I'm just, okay, good.
Okay, so on the next slide, slide 6, we also have energy efficiency utilities. I mentioned energy efficiency previously. In the around the turn of the century, Vermont created Efficiency Vermont to provide statewide electric energy efficiency programs, and you see an electric efficiency charge on your bill. Statewide is kind of in quotes on the slide because Burlington Electric Department has continued to provide their own electric efficiency programs. They do, they work together on joint marketing or kind of statewide programs so that there's kind of seamless for all customers if you're going to your local hardware store, you kind of see the same deal in Burlington or outside of Burlington, but on a custom basis, they have some different programs. And so those budgets are about $50 million a year. I should have said on the previous slide, in some our electric utilities collect a little over $900 million from ratepayers every year. And that goes up and down depending on energy prices in some ways. I'll get into that a little more later. And then in addition to that, our efficiency utilities collect almost $50 million from electric ratepayers. And those go to provide services, rebates for lighting or buy downs before you even get to the store. There's custom programs and just statewide general awareness on reducing consumption. Vermont Gas Systems also has an energy efficiency utility. They also have an alternative regulation plan which allows them to make innovative investments. I only mentioned this today in terms of the electric sector because some of those investments, they're piloting programs to support heat pumps in their territory or geothermal systems. And so I'm not going to go into great detail there, but I kind of wanted you to just be aware that there's a connection there that may come up down the road as it relates to electricity. These entities also get money from some regional the regional greenhouse gas initiative, and then revenues from one of the energy markets, and those are directed by statute to go to thermal investments. So not electric investments, but again, related. Couple more slides, just setting the context of the players. On slide 7, we have Velco. That's Vermont Electric Power Company. They're the transmission provider in the state. So all the high voltage, big transmission lines that that you can see around the state, those highways that move large amount of electricity quickly around the state. Velco is owned by the distribution utilities. We're really unique in Vermont to have that structure. In other states, transmission providers are the for-profit entities that are investor-owned utilities. And so if Velco reduces its costs, those flow through to all distribution utilities and then to all ratepayers. They are under jurisdiction of not only the Public Utility Commission, which has regulatory jurisdiction over all of the distribution utilities in the state, but also they're subject to reliability standards federally and regionally, and they're subject to operational control by ISO New England. So what happens is Velco is responsible for the maintenance of the lines, and they operate them, but they operate them based on direction and dispatch of ISO New England. And I'll get into ISO New England in a second. They are so they're owned by the distribution utilities, and so those distribution utilities need to pay their costs, except for when the transmission lines in Vermont that are owned by Velco provide regional benefit. And in that case, all of New England's ratepayers contribute to the cost of those lines. So if Velco builds a line that has a regional benefit, Vermont ratepayer, and it's in Vermont, obviously, because it's Velco, then the Vermont ratepayers only pay about 4% of those costs, and the rest of New England pays 96%. But similarly, if a line gets built in Massachusetts that has regional benefit, Vermont pays 4% of those costs also. And so, and there's a formula for allocating those costs, and it's based on your maximum demand in each month. And so we'll talk a little bit about peak demand and energy. Just keep that in the back of your head that those peaks are important cost drivers for our utilities.
So I'm wondering, when you're sort of feeling like you have a pause in content section, maybe we could take questions because it's a long presentation. So
Yes, yeah, absolutely. I'm happy to take them throughout. I'll get just ISO New England really quick, and that's a good pause spot. And so, but so on slide 8 is ISO New England, and so they're regulated by the National Regulatory Organization, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commissioning. They're responsible for, as I said, operating the transmission system, so directing, Velco's operation of the transmission system. But they're also, they do power system planning to meet those reliability standards. And then they also design and implement the wholesale electricity markets. And so where energy is bought and sold hourly on in a marketplace, they manage that marketplace to ensure that it's fair and there's nobody's kind of manipulating the market to gain a profit, and to make sure, probably most critically, that there's sufficient power being generated and purchased to meet our region's demand. I could probably spend an hour on just those electricity markets, but I'm gonna pause there and see if there's questions on kind of the context so far.
Representative TJ?
Yes. So one question, TJ, we did hear brief testimony in here about Velco, and I'll be asking them this question later on today as well, not being transparent regarding their fiber and where it is. So and a need for accountability in those aspects. So I see you have provided a lot of information about the accountability and governance measures for Velco and for ISO, but can you speak to what fiber is public, the information about where fiber is publicly available and what would not be publicly available?
I can't give you a good answer right now on that. I wouldn't be prepared. Velco runs fiber on its lines for a number of reasons. One, it helps support the network. I will need to get back to you. I don't know the answer to that question.
So I was thinking it was more of a security thing, which I would think the department would be interested in. So I will ask.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Representative Smith, do you still have a question?
Yeah, I did. Well, from before, do you want me to wait? Okay. What percentage of power generated in Vermont is generated from hydro?
So we will be getting to that.
Oh.
If you want to skip ahead,
No, I would be gonna
okay.
hold that. Representative
I can
Bosler.
ask it again later.
Okay.
Just a couple of very quick questions. I think you might have answered this one already, but how is Efficiency Vermont funded?
They're funded from a line item charge on electric bills, and it's a variable charge based on your consumption.
And when you talk about Velco being owned by Vermont's distribution utilities, does that just mean the utilities? The word distribution made me wonder if it was about owned by those who distribute or those who generate.
Right. So they're owned by our Velco is a utility also. So that's so Velco is a transmission utility, and all of the rest of the electric utilities are distribution utilities.
Okay, so they own Velco.
They own Velco.
Okay, yeah, okay. I just wanted to make sure I understood that.
Yep.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, Representative Torrey.
What is the entity that Velco is? Like what kind of a legal?
So they are, they're actually technically owned by Vermont Transco LLC, and so that's actually a holding company for Velco. And I actually I don't know if I know the answer to that question. If Velco itself is an LLC or another entity that is just because it's owned by distribution utilities, that I can.
I can't.
You know what, Velco's gonna be in
Eric
this
Johnson.
afternoon, so
Later.
Right, so he'll be, yeah.
Yeah, Velco will be here this afternoon.
Right.
Get answers from them. And so will ISO New England. If you're percolating on questions that might be better served for them.
I will investigate the fiber. Our engineering division is responsible for cybersecurity, and so to the extent it's related to that, they'll know the answer to your question. I'll get back to you as soon as I can. So moving on to slide 9, I've already started to use this some of this terminology, but I just on the left side of the slide, I think just want to go over quickly what a megawatt is and what a megawatt hour is, just so make sure we're all on the same page. And so a megawatt is really a measure of power, how much electricity something needs to turn on or that it can generate instantaneously when it's running at full speed. We often say the capacity of a generating facility is 50 megawatts for McNeil in Burlington, for instance, the generating station there. That's how much it can generate at one time. And then a megawatt hour is the measure of energy, so the amount of power that's used or generated over a certain amount of time. So the energy kind of adds the time aspect to it. I have some examples here on the end. I do want to, on the slides on the screen, it's right, but I'll just note since you have them on the bottom. I'm not going to go over these examples, but on the bottom right, there's a typo and it should be 10 million light bulbs for that time. Just to give you a sense, you probably all know this from your electric bills. Vermont households average between 600 and 700 kilowatt hours a year. So a kilowatt takes 1,000 kilowatts to make a megawatt. And that's each month. And so that adds up to, about 7,200, 7,500 kilowatt hours in a year and a little over 7 megawatt hours in per year. If you had a one megawatt hydro facility that was on every hour of the day, it would make 8,760 megawatt hours of power. So I'm just throwing some of those things out there to give you a sense of scale. So now we're gonna move on to kind of what our consumption has looked like. Slide 10. What this chart shows is our annual retail sales in Vermont. So that energy over time that has been consumed. This is in gigawatt hours. So 1,000 megawatt hours is a gigawatt hour. And you can see our consumption has been relatively flat to declining over the last 20 years. 2021 isn't on this chart. I grabbed the wrong chart yesterday when I was putting this on. You have 2021 and it has increased a little bit. You see a big decline that in 2020. Part of that could be COVID related. But again, in general, we see a pretty level history for our annual retail sales. And that, that's despite over the last 20 years, everybody's got a cell phone in their pocket that they're charging, a laptop or iPad. And I think a lot of that, I think I have a chart in a couple of slides about is the impact of energy efficiency. So.
Can you talk a little about the dip there and then the peak? It's not that level. What were the causes of 2003 and then a peak again in 2005?
A lot of these dips and a lot of these peaks and valleys can be weather related. The scale here is only 5,000 to 6,000 gigawatt hours, so it could look bigger than it really is. If the scale went down to 0, it would look a lot flatter than it really is. Our peak consumption on a on a KW basis, so not annually, happened in 2006. And that was the summer of 2006, both regionally and in Vermont. And that, really hot summer and it was kind of the multiple heat waves, and then an extended one in August, and that leads to the first heat wave. Everybody kind of fights through it, and then the second one's like, okay, we're putting our window air conditioner in, and then the third one, it's running the entire time, and then the day of the week, if businesses are operating as well, that can really spike demand. I think that this looks a little more pronounced really just because of the scale of the chart. So going forward, we're on slide 11, we're expecting the potential for increased annual sales, as you might imagine, with planned electrification. The line on the bottom here is a business as usual scenario. It takes a forecast, statewide forecast done by Belco and adjusted for more recent information, and says, here's what we expect under traditional policies, energy policies. The top line takes the comprehensive energy plan modeling and the climate action plan modeling and says, if we were to meet our goals, or if we take the number of heat pumps and electric vehicles that are assumed in those plans, our consumption will increase. And this, perhaps I should have kept the scale smaller on this chart, because this difference is a lot bigger than the one on the previous slide here. It's not doubling, it's not tripling, but it's a pretty significant increase in annual consumption. The next slide shows the peak. The table on the top is showing our both Vermont and annual system peak over the last 5 years. Historically, the middle column there is hour ending. You can see ISO New England peaks kind of at sometimes in 2016, it was at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Since then, it's being pushed later and later and later in the evening. Vermont's peak is either 6 o'clock or 10 o'clock every year, so late in the evening. And so when we talk about generating sources, keep that in mind in terms of the timing of when those sources operate, and if they operate at the time of our peaks during the day or in the evening. Our peaks have, again, stayed relatively constant in 2021. I should have the 2022 data on here. 2021, our peak load was 962 megawatts. That's down. Like I said, in 2006, it was much higher than that. It was over 1,000 megawatts.
We have a question from Representative Stebbins.
Hi, and I apologize for being late, but I didn't get an accident, which is great. Yay! Could you talk a little bit? I mean, you have in here. It's a great presentation. Thank you. You have in here, megawatts versus megawatt hours, and then sort of general energy demand compared to peak. But can you flesh out a little bit like why peak matters? Because I feel like it's a really esoteric thing, and how it drives our cost of our system writ large.
Yeah.
And what it means in terms of which units we call on at a regional level.
So thank you for that question. Sometimes it's hard to kind of hone in on exactly what level to go. So I really appreciate all questions like that. So peak is important because we need to, our peak demand is what we need to plan for. We need to ensure that there's enough generating resources to supply that demand at the maximum time, and enough infrastructure, the transmission and distribution highways, to get those generating sources to the demand where it is. And so there's a number of ways that affects costs. when ISO New England, on the generating side, when ISO New England is dispatching large resources, they say, okay, we know we have a certain amount of demand. Who wants to supply that? And all the generators line up and say, I'm willing to supply it. I will provide my supply for $1 a megawatt hour, or zero if you're a resource that has no fuel costs. You'll say, I may want to, I'll provide it for free because I'm getting paid somewhere else. And so ISO New England says, yep, you can operate. And then, but we still need more power. And so the next generator says, I'll supply it for $10 a megawatt hour. ISO New England will say, you're in. And then it keeps going up the stack until you say, I'll supply it, but it's going to cost you $300 a megawatt hour or $1,000 a megawatt hour. And ISO New England, in operating the markets, will continue to say yes as long as until the need is met. And once that need is met, say $300 a megawatt hour, then every generator that had raised its hand and was selected gets paid that $300 a megawatt hour. So even if they said I'll get paid for free. And so those prices it's kind of a supply and demand chart if you think about it. But that those peak times are when those prices are when kind of those higher cost generators. So the oil generators, or sometimes, a lot of times natural gas, but in the winter there's a lot of oil generators. Those are the ones that have high costs to operate, but they get selected, and that increases costs for everybody. On the transmission side, it's about the infrastructure. So that power also needs to get flowed. And ISO New England can talk about this, but they manage kind of, if there's enough generation in one spot, they may say, well, you actually can't operate. Wind plant in northern Vermont, even though you bid a low cost, you can't operate because we can't get the power to Boston. And so, but those, aside from that, there's the transmission and distribution infrastructure. So, each line, think of it as like a pipe that you're flowing water through. You can only put so much water through that pipe, right? And then it would spill out the outside. And so, if we need to build a bigger pipe, then that comes at a significant cost, and ratepayers will pay that cost either. So the peak demand kind of affects both the infrastructure side, the poles and wires, and then the generating side of the cost. So, is that clear? I hope. Yeah.
Yes, I don't want to cascade too far down because I find myself having many questions too, but Representative Morris.
This is kind of relative to Representative Stebbins' question. So, for instance, 2021, we had 962 peak system load.
Mm-hmm.
Do we have excess capacity beyond that, or what is our benchmark at which we buy? Vermont has to buy.
So this is really, so I'll put it in terms of capacity on the infrastructure side first, whether or not we buy or sell power. So on the infrastructure side, at a transmission level, Velco has done planning studies and said those highways can hold in the summer. We can serve up to 1,200 megawatts of demand, and in the winter, 1,400 megawatts. And the difference is because of the thermal loading of the lines. When it's colder, there's less losses because you don't lose the energy as heat as quickly. On an energy side, I'll show some charts later, including the amount of hydro, but energy is and demand need to be balanced in every minute, every second, every hour. And in every hour, Vermont may have entitlements to and ownership of, 700, 800, 900 megawatts of power, and have demand that are lower than that, or in other hours that we may have demand that's higher than that of and then the difference is just bought and sold in that regional marketplace that ISO New England operates. So we have the capacity to buy power and get it into Vermont and move it around Vermont up to, on the high voltage transmission line, up to 1,200 or 1,400 megawatts. And then the buying and selling of that power really happens in that marketplace. And our utilities do that in every hour of the day.
Representative Sibilia.
Yes, TJ, this peak load forecast includes the base forecast for EVs, heat pumps, and solar. That it notes that the peak forecast includes the base forecast for EVs, heat pumps, and solar. What is the base forecast based on?
Thank you for that question. So this is like the annual energy forecast. The base forecast is a Velco long-range transmission planning forecast that the department adjusted for more recent information on heat pumps and EVs as of late 2021. So part of the energy plan modeling. So if you think of the business as usual forecast in the energy plan and the climate action plan, it's that forecast.
That was specifically, does it include the climate action plan was what I was.
So it does not include in the peak the impact of heat pumps and EVs, so the climate action plan. And the reason that we didn't update that forecast is because neither one of those, neither the Velco long range transmission plan included a little but not much, and the climate action plan, energy plan modeling didn't include the ability to control loads. So the ability to control loads becomes really important in that peak question, right? Of if we're having all these electric vehicles come on, if they all come on at 8 at night or 9 at night when our Vermont peak is, that's going to drive costs. If they come on in the winter when costs are, winter peaks, that's at 5 to 7 at night, that's going to drive costs. But we have, and I don't have it in the printout, there's one in the appendix, we have a number of now electric vehicle rates that we've encouraged our electric utilities to implement that encourage vehicle charging not at the times of peak. And so this forecast doesn't include impacts of that, but as we plan of EVs or of heat pumps on the peak load, but as we plan the system, we do look at that and say, hey, this is what would happen if you don't implement load control, and now evaluate your options for solving for this problem. And one of the key options there is load control, and that's kind of one of the least cost ones. And we've encouraged. I think maybe 2 years ago, you all passed legislation that required electric utilities to have electric vehicle rates by either next year or the year after. I can't remember. And and most utilities covering most of the state have those rates in now. Heat pumps are a little harder to manage, but you can also have innovative rates that encourage heat pump charging or heat pump operation at times that aren't peak. And you do that by cycling the heat pumps so that 10,000 heat pumps aren't going to go on for this 20 minutes or this 30 minutes, right? So, and they may preload, they go on before the start of the hour, and then they don't go on for 20 minutes. And then then they can go on, and the next 20,000 heat pumps can go on. So customers really don't see much of a difference in their home usage or home comfort level, but it really can help level out those peaks. And we can get into it this afternoon. There's other ways, there's other tools in the toolbox, direct paying to customers to reduce their demand, or implementing battery storage programs where those are controlled and can kind of help modulate demand.
Thank you. I was saying to the chair, I could spend hours on this.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I
Like me not.
probably should.
So,
I'm torn. I with you because I'm interested in this. I'm just, I think something basic on this slide, because I don't want to miss a basic point going forward here, but it does say includes base forecast of EVs. But so the base forecast of EVs isn't the ambitious, maybe more ambitious goals set out in the plan. Is that accurate to say?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay, thank
That's
you.
correct.
and
Make
no
sure.
load control.
I just need to-
It's an easy question.
Okay, I doubt it.
What's another term for load control that people might have heard?
Load management or
MDR.
demand response. Yeah, thank you. Which are all, so they all fall under the umbrella of demand side management. And so there's energy efficiency, which is kind of passive, and then there's the active load management, which includes demand response and rates and storage.
Thanks.
So what time do I have till this morning?
Till about 10:20.
10:20.
Because then we're gonna take a break, and then, but if you have the stamina, I don't know if you, how long yeah, that's what you have till this.
Okay.
And you know what, if we need to have you back, what's important is we do this well.
Yeah.
Okay, so we'll have you back if we need to,
Okay, great. That sounds good.
assuming you're willing to come.
Yes, I'm happy to share this information. It's one of our useful roles here, at the department. So slide 13 is the impact of energy efficiency I mentioned. Probably should have had this directly after the load slide. So the blue section, you can see our annual energy demand that has actually happened. You can see that peak that you were talking about, Chair Sheldon, and it looks smaller there on a different scale, but it's still there. And you can see what our energy efficiency programs have been measured to save over time. And so what our peak otherwise would have been. And they're up in the, it's in the 14, 15, 16% range of what we, that investment in electric efficiency has saved in terms of our annual usage. That gets close to, around a little over 7,000 gigawatt hours is what that forecast showed for our meeting our cap scenario. So if you think about, if we didn't have efficiency, we'd already be where we're expecting to be if we meet our, if what was modeled comes true in the energy plan with our electrification. So it's a big number. The whole point is it's a big number.
Okay, well,
Let's listen and keep going.
The chart on the right-hand side of this slide is not well labeled. I realize this is an estimate of electric energy efficiency potential. And there's different ways to measure the potential, like what's technically out there, what is economically achievable, what you can actually do with programs. And the point in this slide, we do this every few years to help us recommend budgets for electric efficiency. And the point in this slide is that it's not this well of electric efficiency out there that we could go and get. It's not to say that we can't get any, and you actually could move, if you took the middle of that chart, you can move some of it forward and get a little more now, but then have a big, a big trough in the middle and then go get more. And so I guess the point of showing this is to say we're on a trajectory to have kind of a good continued pace of acquiring reasonably available, cost-effective efficiency potential that is in, that's required by statute. Well, That is the point of the slide, that we're on a good trajectory there. Okay, so as I was putting these together, I think I may have done some of these out of order, especially given some of the questions you've already asked. The slide 14 is on electric vehicles and our electric vehicle, what is in the state now and what is expected. The left-hand side is up through mid last year. The data lags by around 6 months. So this is July of 2022 that we had about 7,500 electric vehicles in the state. But you can see that's not a lot. We have 600,000 vehicles in the state. But you can see the trajectory here. We're starting to go up that steep curve. And on the right shows the amount of electric vehicle registrations that are expected by different modeled scenarios in the energy plan and the action plan. So that the red line is really the most important one. That's the central mitigation scenario, and you can see by 2048. Everybody has an EV registered, basically 650,000 vehicles. By 2030, we're at about 200,000.
Can you just tell us what those the legend says? Because like BAU.
Oh yeah, the BAU is the business as usual. So that's the that's what I was referencing earlier. The biofuels is a scenario we modeled in the comprehensive energy plan that emphasized using biofuels to meet our renewable energy goals rather than electrification. So in that scenario, there was a slightly lower penetration of electric vehicles. So modeling that scenario was useful to see what was achievable and what the costs were, but I think both the energy plan and the action plan were pointing towards the red line there, the central scenario.
What is local resources? Central caps.
Oh, sorry. That refers to the electric supply that is associated with it. So it actually doesn't affect this chart. It's in terms of it's really in those plans we modeled a heavier dependence on local resources versus out of state resources, and to understand the costs. Yeah.
Representative.
Thank you. The BAU that you're talking about, you mean fossil fuels?
I mean, business as usual assumptions. So, what we have today as our mix of vehicles, our current incentive programs to encourage electric vehicles. It didn't include, for instance, the advanced clean cars and clean trucks rule that ANR just passed. So this BAU is really out of date now. And so we're on a trajectory now. If we update the BAU, the business as usual, which is happening, by the way, we're working with the consultant Energy Futures Group that helped with the modeling the first time to actually update the business as usual. So this BAU is a little out of date, and we're probably closer to we're definitely closer to the red line than the BAU line. I don't know if we're all the way to the red line.
Thank you. To achieve 620,000 electric vehicles by 2048, how are you going to charge all of them? There must be a plan how all these cars are going to be charged.
Right. So the Agency of Transportation has been working on the charging plan. Vermont actually has more chargers per capita than any other state in the country. That's great on one hand, and on the other hand, we don't have a lot of people here. So, but we are making investments in charging infrastructure. So there's There's pilots going on from some of our distribution utilities that support the electric utility infrastructure to get either, three-phase power to a charging station or other what's called make-ready work. Excuse me. And there's right now we're, the state has already been putting money towards electric vehicle infrastructure. The governor put in his budget over the last few years, and the legislature adopted and appropriated money for charging infrastructure. And then the federal government, as you know, has been throwing money around, and there's a lot of it has been going to electric vehicle infrastructure. And I think, the Agency of Commerce and Community Development and Agency of Transportation have been working together to implement that plan and move that funding and have a plan for charging. And on the electric side, it's what we're working on at the department is making sure that there's rate structures for those chargers that actually encourage companies to want to locate those chargers in Vermont. So even with a whole lot of money, it can be, on the traditional rate structures, it can be really expensive for those operators to operate their charging infrastructure. There's on a lot of rates, on a lot of commercial rates, there's something called a demand charge, and you have to, what customers pay for in that demand charge is they have a low kind of base load consumption, but they might peak and have a lot of consumption at one time. And so the theory behind those demand charges is that they, customers need to pay for that, that ensuring that there's capacity to serve them at that peak time when they have the most demand. Those that rate structure can be really problematic for a electric vehicle charging company coming in, because they are basically only peaks, right? It's when somebody charges and then they're on and they're up to 150 kW, but they can't kind of recover that cost over the lots of hours because it's only those short hours. So that was a really long-winded way of saying we're trying to work with the utilities to encourage them to have designs that make it more, that still pay for the system, make sure it still pays for the infrastructure, but also not disincentivize operators of charging stations to come on. Sorry, I explained that in a
it sounds
roundabout way.
It's a long-winded way of saying you don't know where all this power is going to come from to generate enough electricity for 600,000 cars.
Oh, well, that was a different question. I thought you were talking about the infrastructure
No.
itself.
We can build 100,000 charging stations, but how's that? Where's all the electricity going to come from?
Right.
It's going to charge all these cars.
Yeah, so that's a good question, and there's a lot of work underway. We're working really closely with our state partners in other states to talk about how we can support offshore wind projects. We're considering there's several transmission projects that are pretty regularly being discussed that to bring power from either New York or Canada down into New England. One of those is actually already permitted in Vermont, the New England Clean Power Link, that is permitted to go under Lake Champlain and underground to Ludlow to bring 1,000 megawatts into the state. And so there are a lot of discussions underway. We certainly need more generating. We need more power, whether it comes from Canada or offshore wind or sources, onshore sources within New England. I think that's the discussion we need to have and want to have, but we're kind of exploring all those options.
Ask one more question.
One more.
Okay. You thought about nuclear.
So, yeah, I mean, nuclear is on the table as an option. I
Cleanest and the cheapest, isn't it?
What's that?
The cleanest and the cheapest.
Well, it depends on how you count those things. I would say it does not have carbon emissions at the source. Right now, we do have nuclear power in our power mix. So we purchase power from the Seabrook plant in New Hampshire, and we purchase it from a plant in Connecticut also, a little less so. Most of it's from the one in New Hampshire. New generating plants, we're not, our utilities are not looking into, it's not part of any of their integrated resource plans of building a new nuclear. I think that comes with a lot of risk and a lot of challenges. And I haven't heard of any other new ones in the state or in the region that have been proposed. But, if one were to be proposed and built in New England, we would consider purchasing power from it.
It would solve the carbon problem, wouldn't it? For a lot of it.
Actually, we need to move on.
Yeah, it'd be non-emitting. It creates other issues as well. So there's a balance, and it solves other issues as well also. So yeah.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay. The next slide 15 is heat pumps. This is a little different than the other ones. This is actually a forecast from Efficiency Vermont on the number of installed heat pumps that they expect under current conditions. And so we're installing about 13,000 heat pumps a year right now, and expecting that to kind of continue apace. And you can see kind of a range of outcomes here. This forecast was done before the Inflation Reduction Act, and additional tax credits for heat pumps, additional funding incentives for heat pumps. So, I'm showing you the most recent forecast we have, but I also want to caveat that by saying they may need to be updated as well. So,
I think I'm going to say let's take a 5-minute break, and then we'll come back at 5 minutes past the hour, just because we've been going about an hour. I want to give everyone a chance to move around a little and give you a break.
Sounds good.